Today's show is sponsored by Earth Friendly Products. For over 40 years, Earth Friendly Products brought you the greenest home products for all your family needs. Learn more at ecos.com. That's ecos.com. Now, let's get to the show.
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm your host, Tony Sweet.
And I'm Eddie Connor. And we're delighted to have co-host and 8-time Emmy-winning investigative reporter with us, Anna Garcia. Today our topic is something the country has been dealing with on a daily basis for almost a year now, and it's the preparation for the 2016 presidential election.
Yes, and the best-selling author and political analyst Roger Stone is here to help our listeners understand why the U.S. government is broken and if there's anything we can do about it.
We hope there's something they can do about it. Roger's a seasoned political operative and pundit. He's a veteran of 8, count them ladies and gentlemen, 8 national presidential campaigns, and he has served as a senior campaign aide to 3 Republican presidents before leaving the GOP for the Libertarian Party. He's the author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ.
He is also the author of The Clintons' War on Women and Jeb and the Bush Crime Family.
Oh, that's going to be interesting. We're going to find out more about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and let's get the show started with best-selling author and political analyst, Roger Stone.
Welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much.
Well, the crowd loves you, so we might as well get started. And I want to say that it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I know that you work with a lot of great people, and you've been doing this for such a long time, and it's a pleasure to learn from your experience. So that said, Anna, I'm going to have you go ahead and lead off the first question because I know you work a lot in politics and investigating and reporting.
I do, but I think I want to touch on some things going on today because there's just so much going on in the world. And, you know, it's a combination of we finally got confirmation today from the FBI that we had a true terrorist attack on American soil. Wow. So what happened in San Bernardino. Additionally, we have all of the candidates that are running for president. And I'm curious, Roger, what your reaction was this week when I believe it was the Daily News that had that incredible front page, and it took a shot at all of the candidates for saying that they were sending prayers out to all the victims who were killed or wounded in the San Bernardino massacre. And do you think that was a fair shot when, you know, the newspaper basically said, prayers aren't helping us?
Well, first of all, I think what happened in San Bernardino shows you how quickly, literally overnight, the American political calculus can change, how any cataclysmic event like this can change the entire trajectory of an election. And therefore, anyone who tells you with certainty who the next president is going to be is talking through their hat because politics, particularly in the age of mass media, is particularly volatile, and things can change very dramatically overnight. You've got 2 different narratives here, one in each party, and the individual candidates are speaking to the narrative in their party. Within the Democratic Party, the narrative is clear, which is greater gun control laws would lessen the domestic violence and gun violence that we've seen tragically over the last year. In the Republican Party, of course, the narrative is the exact opposite, that crazy people are responsible for these crazy acts, and it's not access to guns. In fact, as you know, California has among the strictest gun laws in the country, which didn't have any deleterious effect on the efforts of the terrorists in San Bernardino to kill 14 people. So you see each party speaking to their base in the nomination phase of the election. As we go to a general election, you're now going to have a clash between these two different points of view.
Well, how do you feel, the candidates are stacking up, or how do you feel that the candidates are reacting to this and this event, how it is going to affect the political debate?
Well, obviously a harder line against ISIS, a harder line against domestic terrorism, a harder line in terms of greater surveillance of some Muslims in this country is going to have greater political appeal than it did just a few days ago. I mean, I really think that we can narrow this race down. This is my opinion, of course, but I'm a veteran actually of 9 national presidential campaigns. I need to update my bio because, of course, Trump makes 9. I resigned from the Trump campaign
He says
August.
he fired you. He says he fired you, Roger. So each one of you is going to stick to your
let
story.
Me handle that one. The New York Times, in Politico, each had 5 individual confirmations of my resignation, all of whom saw my resignation letter in advance, and all of whom I confided in my decision to resign. So, Stone 5, Trump 0. The point, though, is
Are you saying Trump is a liar?
Supporter.
Are you saying Trump is a liar? Donald Trump is a liar? Is that what you're saying,
No,
Roger?
no. I think it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction because nobody leaves Trump. Look, we're reconciled. We've been friends for 37 years. I first met Trump when I went to New York in 1979 to organize Governor Ronald Reagan's campaign for president, and he and his father, Fred Trump, were among the first members of the Reagan Finance Committee in New York, which in New York in 1979, that was a very small group. George Bush was the flavor of the month and the flavor of the establishment Republicans. So I remain a strong supporter of Trump's. I have spoken on his behalf, even though we disagree on some issues. I don't agree with him on everything. The one thing I do find compelling about his candidacy is his financial independence means that he is not reliant on any special interest, any billionaire, any super PAC, any outside influence for financial support for his election. I have worked in the Senate as an aide to Senator Bob Dole. I've worked in the House as an aide to Congressman Bob Steele, who was on the Budget Committee. I've worked as a heavy-duty lobbyist, and I can tell you, the system's broken. It's a cesspool. Money in Washington and the right lobbyists, the right pleaders, can buy anything whatsoever, anything. And until you find a way to fix that, then you're going to get government by, for, and of the special interests. You're not going to get government by the people. Trump's financial independence and the fact that he's completely unscripted, which I think is pretty clear, is what makes him so attractive to people, and it's the largest reason why I continue to support his candidacy.
Do you think
that said, I think the Republican nomination will boil down to one of 3 people: Trump himself, Senator Ted Cruz, or Senator Marco Rubio. I think even this early in the going, I would predict with a fair high degree of certainty that Jeb Bush will not be the nominee, John Kasich will not be the nominee, Chris Christie will not be the nominee.
What about Ben Carson?
Well, a little bit of a wild card. I think there's a little bit of Herman Cain there in the sense that as foreign policy becomes more important, that would, at least on paper, theoretically hurt Carson's candidacy. On the other hand, it has not hurt Trump. Carson has begun to dip in the polls. I have a hard time putting my head around what the theme of his candidacy is. In other words, I'm sure he's a brilliant surgeon, and he's a very nice fellow. I've met him. He's a very good guy. But I'm really not sure how to boil his candidacy down in one sentence other than I'm the black guy, which makes him in the Republican Party very different than everybody. So I think his chances, while he might make the cut, you could make a case for his nomination. I do think he's not well organized in Iowa. Iowa is an organizational exercise. It's not a big media exercise. It's not a television, radio exercise. It really is guts organization to turn people out on a very cold night, to sit in a drafty auditorium or a school gymnasium for 3 hours. It's not an easy thing to do.
As far as the Democrats side of it, who do you feel like is leading there?
Well, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, I have this book, The Clintons' War on Women, which is doing very well on Amazon. It's a very controversial book, and I've been out on a book tour, and the book signings have gone quite well, but at almost all of my book signings, at least half the people who show up to buy the book and to get it signed are supporters of Bernie Sanders, for which I'm very grateful. I do think, Bernie Sanders says that he is a democratic socialist. That's kind of like being a meat-eating vegetarian. On the other hand, the energy in the Democratic Party is definitely with the progressives. And I think that his candidacy strength is based more on the fact that he's not Hillary Clinton than it is on the fact that he is Bernie Sanders. He's been in the Senate for 30 years. He's actually literally never had a job in the private sector. He's been on the public payroll his entire life. I could make a pretty good case that he's part of the problem, not part of the solution, but his supporters don't feel that way. I think given the structure of their nomination and the superdelegates and the financial advantage that Hillary has, she is still the odds-on favorite to be the Democratic nominee.
Really?
I would be surprised if Sanders could upset her.
Do you think the hearings that she went through, where a lot of people thought she, of course, I guess depends who you ask, thought she did very well against 12 hours worth of questioning. Do you think that helped her or hurt her?
I disagree with that analysis. I think it hurt her because you could come up with at least 5 more lies she got caught in. There is no question that she said in the immediate aftermath of the attack on the mission in Benghazi that the attack on our mission was caused by an anti-Islamic video that was shown one time in Turkey, online by the way, where less than 5% of the people are online. Yet we know within hours of the attack that she emailed her daughter and the Egyptian ambassador and admitted that we'd been attacked by a radical group that was affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Now, you might think that's obscure, but it won't be obscure when it's put into a 30-second television ad and you see millions of dollars worth of it in these swing states, for example. So I don't think that that was a great day for her. I disagree with the mainstream media general narrative. She had her moments, but I think she got nailed several times. And part of her problem, of course, is a long trail of lies, whether it is I was broke when I left the White House or I didn't have classified documents on my server. According to yesterday's New York Times, we now have over 900 classified documents that were on her server. Whether it was the fact that her grandparents were immigrants, they weren't. That she was named after Sir Edmund Hillary, she wasn't. The list goes on and on. So I think she's got a problem with the truth, and that narrative is going to become an issue if it isn't already.
So could you actually almost say the same thing about anybody that is running in this particular presidential election, that they all have a problem with telling the truth?
Yeah, it raises a fair point. I mean, one has to wonder how Trump continues to be, shall we say, inexact on some matters, and the voters don't seem to take it, to hold it against him. On the other hand, I did a CBS interview earlier this morning, and I came up with 2 examples that occurred to me. Read my lips, no new taxes. That was a lie. You like your health care plan? You can keep your health care plan. That was a lie, too. It's possible that voters have become so numb to this, that they so completely distrust anyone who's in the political realm that they kind of expect a little bit of verification.
And out of the 2 parties, who do you think is abusing the system the most, in your opinion?
Or both equally.
Yeah, or both equally. Which party?
Completely equally. Both parties are one party. Look, I have a great sentimental attachment for the Republican Party. I was a young Republican national chairman in the 70s. I learned politics as a protege of Richard Nixon. I worked in 3 campaigns for Ronald Reagan. I'm no longer a Republican because the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have morphed into one party. It's the Wall Street Party. It's the big money party. It's the party of endless war. It's the party of erosion of our civil liberties, spying on our emails, monitoring our phone calls. It's the party of massive debt, saddling our great-great-grandchildren with debt. It is the party of bloated federal spending and a budget that's out of control. And both parties are in it together. Look, I lived in Washington. I worked as a lobbyist. I saw the Democrats and Republicans fight for the TV cameras. And when they turn the cameras off, you know what they do? They all go to dinner with each other and slap each other on the back, because it's all about re-election. It's all about the endless money chase. So I wouldn't criticize one party over the other. I think they're in it together. Now, like Teddy Roosevelt, I could go back to the Republican Party. He left. He went back. I could go back. But at the moment, at least, I'm a registered member of the Libertarian Party. Now, that's pretty wacky, too, because you meet some people in that party who are pretty extreme, and they're all different stripes of libertarians. But I pretty much soured on the two-party duopoly, because I think the two parties really are identical, and the Presidential Commission on Debates is not appointed by the president. It's not a commission, and it's not about a debate. It's about keeping anybody other than the Republican and the Democrat out of the debate. Governor Gary Johnson was the Libertarian Party nominee. He was on the ballot in 48 states, which is a monumental accomplishment, by the way, yet he couldn't get into the debates. So you had a candidate who wanted to legalize and tax marijuana. You had a candidate who wanted to repeal the Patriot Act and stop the government spying. You had a candidate who wanted to withdraw our troops from Afghanistan immediately. But he couldn't get on television, so nobody even knew that his candidacy existed. In that election, almost 70% of the people told us in polls that they were unhappy with the choice between Romney and Obama, and they wished there was another choice. There was another choice, but the mainstream media chose not to tell us about it.
Which leads me to this question. How much of the problem with our presidential election and procedures is really the American public as much as it is the candidates running for president?
Very good question. I mean, we do have low information voters whose, low information voters' vote counts as much as a high information voter's vote.
Will you
so
describe
those voters who study the issues, read the newspapers, watch the news, listen to shows like this, form an opinion, have the same vote as those people who don't really know the names of the candidates and don't bother to look at any of it until they go in the booth, and then they vaguely kind of pick a name that they might recognize, perhaps. I'm one of those who believes that more information is always better. My books are controversial, but I can tell you, when you write a book that produces the kind of bombshell political information that I think I've produced, the lawyers for your publishers, believe me, they put you through the ringer like nothing you've ever seen. They make you justify every period, every comma, every claim. Because they don't want to get sued, and they don't want you to get sued. But I think that the American people, I agree with Jefferson, if the people know all the facts, they will always make the right decision. It's only when they're not told the facts or when they don't seek the facts that bad decisions are made.
Yeah, but how much of the actual facts? I'm liking what you're saying, because I've never heard the term. I think you called it low information voters.
Yep.
And so those are the people who basically get brainwashed by the 30-second campaigns that run every frickin' 20 seconds on national television, right?
Yep.
And then,
so the funny thing is, the same voters who tell us I don't like negative advertising, they're the same voters that will turn around and tell you exactly what is in those negative ads. They can recite them right back to you, which means they work. The reason politicians of both parties use them is because they work. This is still a better system than what we did have, because in the old days, when there were only three networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, if it didn't happen there, it didn't happen at all.
Sure.
And therefore, you had at that point, three corporations controlling virtually all of the electronic news that we were getting. And that's a dangerous thing. Today, it's not much better. No. 6 corporations control almost 90% of the electronic news that is coming to us.
And how is that legal?
So if they don't report something, it's like the tree falling in the forest. Nobody hears it.
Except the rabbit that was killed by the tree. So based on all of your information, who do you, in your professional opinion, having the inside scoop on so much of this, Roger, who out of all of the candidates is actually, in your opinion, for the people more than anybody else on the platform?
I think that I could boil that down in both parties. I'd have to say Sanders in the Democrats and Trump in the Republicans, only because Trump is not a career politician. When this is over, win or lose, he goes back to his business. He's not looking at the next office. He's not, I assure you, having worked for him on and off for 30 years, he's not reading off of polls or focus groups or talking points that were prepared by someone else. What you see is what you get. It's completely unscripted, uncontrolled, unhandled, uncoached. What you see is what you get. Now, that may be good or that may be bad, but voters, I think, are finding it refreshing. He's like a man working without a net.
So, Roger, how does that work, though, in politics? Is this part of the friction as to why you are no longer working with Donald Trump? And who is running the campaign? There's got to be some form of a campaign staff.
Well, there is. I think he's got 4 people, which is almost unheard of for a national campaign staff. But the short answer is he's running the campaign.
Oh,
He's the strategist. He decides what the campaign will say. He certainly decides what the candidate will say. I left for 2 reasons. One, I had certain strategic disagreements with him, which I'm not at liberty to discuss because I signed a confidentiality agreement, and I'm happy to live by it. But secondarily, I didn't want there to be any confusion that a book that I worked on for 2 years, The Clintons' War on Women, was somehow a Trump project or a Trump-funded project or a Trump-encouraged project. P.S. He's never read my book. I hope he will, but he hasn't. And I didn't want any confusion about that. Getting the real story of the Clintons and the fact that Bill Clinton has been an abuser of women, and I'm not talking about consensual sex. I'm not talking about girlfriends, mistresses, one-night stands, conquests. I'm talking about something far darker, which is sexual assault and rape. I interviewed 24 women who've been assaulted by Bill, and they all tell a chillingly similar story, even though in many cases they've never spoken to each other. And Hillary's role in the cover-up of those crimes, where she has been the point person, denigrating and degrading and seeking to silence women who've been unlucky enough to be his victims. Now, just yesterday, she was asked about this in New Hampshire because she put out an ad aimed at college women who were the victims of sexual assault, in which she said, "You deserve to be believed." And she was asked by a voter in New Hampshire yesterday, well, what about Kathleen Willey, Juanita Broderick, and Paula Jones? And she said, well, they deserve to be believed until evidence proved otherwise. Well, there is no evidence. I don't know what she's talking about. There is no evidence that indicates that those women have been less than truthful about what happened to them at the hands of Bill Clinton. In fact, the Clintons paid Paula Jones $850,000 in a settlement in a civil suit over Bill's assault of Paula Corbin Jones, which is a little-known fact.
Wow.
wow, that's unbelievable.
Okay, I'm going to go back to when John Edwards ran for president, and then he was derailed with his marital affair, extramarital affair.
You mean with his penis?
Yeah, with his penis.
Yes.
Why is it that he had one extramarital affair that we know of, but Clinton apparently has had many your allegations against him of rape and all this other stuff? Why hasn't it derailed his reputation and then Hillary's candidacy?
Well, the Clintons have been more skillful at deflecting it through a very, very aggressive terror campaign to silence his victims. And many of these stories, although they've never been discredited or disproved, never received the kind of widespread media coverage that I think they deserve to. Although I would point out to you that the major media outlets in this country, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, by and large ignored the John Edwards story entirely. John Edwards, ironically, was brought down by the National Enquirer.
That's true. It's true. And I know, I used to read the Enquirer. I did.
I still read it.
Because I've always believed that there are stories everywhere.
Yes.
And that story had been in there for so long, and they are the ones who not only broke it, and I remember the arguments in the newsroom about believing them or not believing them, but I think that was one of several events that turned the reporting in the United States and how it worked and how we moved to a more tabloid version of news. I believe that O.J. Simpson turn things towards high-speed chases. I mean
Wow.
that really was the pivotal event. Each change in how we cover events really has been rocked or solidified by an event that changed how we did things. And that was one of them.
So based on the way the American people would like gravitate more to a story in the Enquirer that ends up making national news, and it's true, and or OJ during the high-speed chase thing, and everybody tuned into that, then the proper news outlets started mimicking and mirroring that so they would get the ratings.
Yeah, well,
Well, they almost had no choice.
Yeah.
So look, 6 million people read the National Enquirer every week. That's 6 million voters. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that those buyers are by and large not online. Here's an interesting thing I think people don't know. The contents of the National Enquirer never go online because it would destroy their business model. They're trying to sell you the news in the drugstore or the supermarket, and that's how they distribute.
but that's
If
a failing
they put
business.
that same information online, they'd be out of business.
But that's a failing business, Roger, because you
Yes.
know you can see how subscription rates are changing and dropping. Where I mean, look at one of the most popular websites. It's the Daily Mail. And I think the Daily Mail is starting to fill that hole where the Star and the Enquirer used to hold, but they've got the presence online. I mean, yeah, sometimes I still get a Star magazine, but I got to tell you, it's outdated by the time I get it. So the Enquirer and the Star, I mean, they're old news.
Yeah, it's definitely a losing model. Within 10 years, there'll be no print newspapers. There'll be no reason for them. The entire presence, probably less, probably 5 years, the entire presence will be an online presence, which means the news will be even more quickly moving. In other words, things can change even more dramatically. You're not worried about being in cold type. A story can be updated, at a spur of a moment, and now often are. You're absolutely right about the Daily Mail. They are filling a void between serious media and tabloid media, and of course their numbers are enormous.
Roger, I have a really interesting question that just popped up based on what you and Anna were talking about. There's been a lot of stuff under the radar that Tony and I, and I'm sure Anna has too, been finding out about, where there are certain bills secretly being passed along the way, under the table, if you will, at midnight and that sort of thing, where there are certain people in office and upcoming office that want to control the internet the way we're used to it now. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I think it's a very dangerous trend. When the government says it wants to regulate the internet, that's a bad word. What they mean is they want to control it. The internet is the greatest tool for democracy
Yes.
In my lifetime, because it now means, if I can be a little egotistical, Roger Stone equals New York Times. They can say whatever they want and reach 1 million people, but guess what? So can Tony Sweet. So can Roger Stone, just by going online. So it's been a great equalizer, and therefore you can also no longer keep a cap on information.
It's a threat.
I wrote a book on the Kennedy assassination. For many, many, many years, the three networks insisted on the Warren Commission version of events. 70% of polls tell us today 7% of Americans do not believe that Oswald killed Kennedy or that he acted alone. That number was 20% 20 years ago. That's because of the internet. The internet has given people more access to information that they can judge on their own.
And therefore it's a threat. They can't conceal things as easily as they could in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and blah.
Well, that plus think about it, cell phone cameras. So at the time of Kennedy's assassination, there was one guy there with a movie camera.
Right.
And his movie film may or may not have been altered. If that happened today, there would have been 100 people with video of exactly what happened. And there would have been no way to control all those individual cameras recording an event of history. So the process has been opened up, and now I think that there are those in government, those in the state, who are concerned that the people have too much access to information and that they have too much access to intercommunication through the internet. I can only hope the federal government will leave the internet alone. It's working just fine.
It is. So I want to go backwards for a second to Donald Trump. Speaking,
Sure.
It's like I gravitate. I don't choose my candidates based on the bullshit that you see on TV. I truly don't. I base it on, when it gets right down to it, the candidate out of the two that has the purest heart, for lack of a better way to say it. And I know that's woo-woo, but that's the honest to goodness truth. And I was happy to hear you say, at least on the Democratic side, that Bernie is, in your opinion, based on what you know, sort of leading the Democratic energy as far as the way a lot of people in America are focusing on it. Now, I want to go back to Donald Trump. I think the reason he is leading is because so many people in this country who will spout off without all of the information see themselves in him. So when he's sitting there and making fun of somebody who's handicapped, there's a lot of people in this country that do that all day long. Whenever he's like saying, I would blow them up and I would do this and I would do that and I would shoot them, there's a lot of people who think that way in a limited thinking way. Do you think he's simply just mirroring that type of mentality? And that's
I think he has an everyman quality. I think he has an average person quality, as average person as a billionaire can be. Look, he's the only billionaire I know who's not popular on Wall Street.
Yeah, well,
he's not popular there at all. So yes, he does talk like the average person. He talks like you would talk at the dinner table, and he's very passionate.
Yeah.
Add to that his confidence, his swagger, and his kind of can-do spirit, which Americans always like, which is what they liked about Reagan, and a certain confidence, a certain optimism about the country's future, and I think you have a very powerful candidacy. But I do believe he has deep-seated beliefs, as I believe Sanders does, for example. In other words, and I've written 2 books on this, the Clintons aren't progressives. They believe in nothing but the money. Where's the money? The Bushes aren't conservatives. They believe in the money. They're both crony capitalists. And in this election, I think voters are looking for something far more genuine. They don't want a president who's transactional. They want somebody who has deeply held beliefs. I think that plus they want an outsider, at least the perception of an outsider, and I think that has fueled both Sanders and Trump to a certain extent.
Well, one thing that I saw, you were on a couple other shows, and I even found it fascinating. I remember when I saw Clinton, when he left office, how George Sr. and Clinton become very chummy and friends, and I thought they were so opposite of each other when it come to their political parties. I know you were saying that the Clintons and the Bushes really worked together quite a bit. Is that correct? And not in a good way?
No, I think they line their pockets together. So, for example, they formed a nonprofit organization for earthquake relief in Haiti.
Right.
It raised $138 million. It spent $10 million on the ground in Haiti. Somebody pocketed $128 million, but we can't find out who because the nonprofit went out of business and they won't answer any questions. There are multiple examples of the Bushes and the Clintons rehabilitating and bolstering each other. Barbara Bush says that Bubba is like the 5th Bush brother, and George W. Bush says that Bill is like his brother, which makes Hillary his sister-in-law. Gag me with a spoon. Their policies are the same. Endless war, spying on us, massive debt, more spending, higher taxes on working people while the people on Wall Street in the hedge fund industry particularly pay almost nothing. They talk a good game. They go out of their way to sound different at election time, but sadly, they're almost exactly the same. It's crony capitalism at its worst.
Yeah, it's a monotone, cookie cutter, low frequency, just spouting and regurgitating information they're told to speak, and you can feel it. That's why I can't stand this time of year. I just can't stand it. Or this time every 4 years.
And one thing that I also found fascinating that you also were talking about when President Reagan first was elected, and of course Bush was his vice president, when he was the assassination attempt by Hinckley. Could you give us some insight on what your thoughts on that? Because I heard you talk about this before.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are missing the context. At the time that Reagan is shot, shortly after their election, there's a giant fight going on inside the administration over who will control foreign policy. Poor Secretary of State Al Haig, he actually thinks he's supposed to be the Secretary of State, running foreign policy and reporting to the president. George Bush, the vice president, has a very different idea. There's a massive struggle over a succession of power agreement which Vice President Bush wants Reagan to sign. Every member of the Reagan cabinet is opposed to the signature on this agreement. but Reagan signs it. 6 days later, there's an attempt on his life. There are two shooters, not one. I show the actual, in my next book, there are actual photos of the assassination scene. The photos you've mostly seen have been cropped. When you look to a wider shot, you can see a second man standing on a balcony just above the hotel door, very clearly holding a gun in his hand. That would make sense because the trajectory of the bullets, as reflected in the media reports from the FBI, don't fit the location of Hinckley, who's crouching, meaning the trajectory of the bullets should have been upwards, but the bullet that hit Reagan is from a downward trajectory. The government, in the middle of the media coverage, changes their story, and then the problem really is that the 5 shots squeezed off by Hinckley, who was a Bush family friend, whose father, John Hinckley Sr., is a longtime financier of George Bush Sr.'s political career. The 5 shots that he squeezed off are all accounted for. None of them hit Reagan. Then we're told that a bullet ricocheted off the car door and hit Reagan. Well, the problem is there's no damage to the car door. None of the photos have ever been released by the government, but this one photo. There are others that have never been released. Both Judy Woodruff at CBS and Judy Woodruff at NBC and Leslie Stahl at CBS both report on air about the second gunman standing above the doorway. Those videotapes can no longer be found, but they were recorded in real time by some. I've heard them. When I sought to interview both of those ladies, both of whom I know well, both told me they had no memory of that. So one has to wonder. This is covered pretty extensively in my upcoming book, Jeb and the Bush Crime Family.
Ooh, that's a great title.
Yeah, it looks great. So, okay, so the assassination attempt. Why would Reagan? Is this one of those keep your enemies closer thing? Because why would Reagan, even in his second presidential
I like
election.
presidential, though.
I can't even
I
say
like
it.
that.
But why would he keep Bush? Why would he keep Bush as his vice president?
This would have been his first term. I was among those who urged him not to select Bush. Some of his advisors, I think, misserved him, told him he needed a moderate Republican running mate, and then there was a great rush to get Gerald Ford, the former president, to run for vice president. That was a head fake to buy time. In the end, he got stuck with George Bush. That was probably the greatest single mistake of his presidency. And there was an immediate fight for the control of the nuclear football while Reagan was at George Washington University. Al Haig famously gets in trouble for saying on national television, "I'm in charge here." The problem is if you take the entire quote of what he said was, "The vice president is on his way here by air, and he is next in line for the presidency. In the meantime, I am in control here." But by truncating his quote, we make him look like a power-hungry nut, which was the idea.
Well, was he?
No, I don't think so. I think he was just trying to do his job. If you look at what he said in the larger context, he was in charge at the White House in terms of the actual control of the nuclear football at the time until Bush arrived. So, but this, I think, again, had to do with a power struggle between Vice President Bush and Secretary of State Haig, in which they had been scuffling over control of foreign policy.
So, okay, I'm a big history buff, and you
And a conspiracy
And a
theorist.
conspiracy
Roger,
theorist.
did you know that you were going to find a home between these two? Every time they bring me on a show, I think, oh, maybe we'll talk about something other than conspiracies. But these two are obsessed. And Roger, I think you are of the same.
No, actually, I don't deal in conspiracy. I deal in facts.
See,
I've learned the hard
see.
way that when you write a book like this, the lawyers for your publisher put you through the
I'm
ringer
sure they
like
do.
nothing you've ever seen. You've got to justify everything you've written,
And
every sentence, every period, every comma, and you got to document it all. And let's just say that truth is often stranger than fiction.
Oh, yeah.
And the government very rarely tells you the full and entire truth.
I agree with that.
And in being somebody like yourself that's been in this field for so long, what made you want to write those books? Because you've been in some pretty big campaigns and administrations. So what made you want to write these books?
Yeah, look, I spent 40 years in the corroded rectum of the two-party system, and I saw all of this up close.
Ouch! And stinky.
And I began to realize that there was more to the historical narrative of the country than we were being told. And I was fascinated, even as a boy, by the Kennedy assassination because it never made sense. No one ever established a motive for Oswald. And then we can go on and on. There's no nitrogen powder burns on his face or his hands, so he couldn't have fired a gun that day. The Dallas Police Department picks up 4 shells from the 6th floor of the school book depository, but the Dallas Police evidence locker only has 3 shells. The shells that were collected by the officer had his initials scratched in them, procedure for the Dallas Police Department, but the shells in the evidence locker have no initials signed on them. Say, oh, well, obviously Oswald killed Officer Tippit. Really? The 4 shells found at Tippett's were shot from an automatic, but Oswald is arrested at the theater with a revolver. These are interesting things. And, of course, Americans love a murder mystery. Now, 53 years after the fact, people are still fascinated by what really happened and what the larger motives were in the coup d'etat that I believe removed John Kennedy, who had the potential to be one of our greatest presidents.
No, I agree with that.
If everything keeps going the way that it is right now, just the basic trajectory of how the candidates are being and where our country is going, as politically speaking, Roger, what is your biggest fear?
Well, I think one of the things that you put your finger on, which is I do not want to see the regulation of the Internet, because I think it will close down communications in this country. The Internet is the greatest thing to happen in my lifetime in terms of getting the average citizen more information and giving them more choices for sources of information. The only greater invention might be the advent of cable television, because it just gives us so many more choices. Back in the days when we only had 3 networks and 3 national newspapers, there was only one narrative, and it was very largely dictated by the government or by the system or by the establishment. Call it whatever you want. So the greatest fear I would have is that the politicians will now try to shut down this source of information, which would set us back 200 years.
And how hard do you think it'll be, or easy do you think it will be for them to do that? We know that they sneak everything through and they word it differently. That's like, let's vote for saving the animals, and then the next thing you know, they're jerking the computer systems away from us. How easy or hard do you think it will be for them to actually try to do that now that we're hooked into it?
Well, you make a good point. Look, I worked for many years as a lobbyist, and I saw how legislation happens, and you're exactly right. You get that midnight amendment on the last minute of the last hour of the last day of the session, and before you know it, it's gone to the White House for a signature, and nobody even knows what's in there. And that's how the sausage is made. I do think it'll be a heck of a fight because it's like putting toothpaste back in the tube. People love the Internet. They love Twitter. They love Facebook. They love social media.
They love connecting.
And they're not going to give it up anytime soon.
Plus, you know, let's face it, the most powerful lobbying group we know is Wall Street. And they're making an awful lot of money off of tech companies, the Internet, and all of the associated companies that support all of that in the tech industry. So I just don't see that happening. I really don't. I think the greater question is, how do you maintain that level of access and privacy with security? And that, I think, is the greater question when we look at Paris, we look at all the intelligence that we didn't have. We look at San Bernardino, and we basically can say this is a major failure of intelligence. How could we not have known? How could all the different intelligence agencies not have known? And so the question is, they're fighting for more control of information, and how can you give the government that access to keep us all secure, yet protect my privacy?
Well, first of all, we don't know what they really know. There was a firestorm 3 weeks ago when Trump suggested that, that George W. Bush did not keep us safe on 9/11. And then there was an extraordinary piece in Politico magazine quoting two former CIA directors who admitted that, yes, we had many, many, many tips that men were being trained to fly planes into buildings, and we knew there were multiple warnings about 9/11, and unfortunately, because the intelligence services weren't talking to each other, they never connected the dots. And in many cases, the informants who came forward were deported, and no follow-up was done on what they had said.
But Roger,
So,
things have changed. Things technologically have changed from the World Trade Center attack and what we have recently seen in France and now in San Bernardino. The technology has changed so tremendously that, the question is, how do you maintain our privacy and balance that with the greater security of this nation?
It's an excellent question. I'm not sure that I have the answer. I do think that when changes come, they're going to ride in as something else. In other words, when they move to regulate the internet, it's going to be, for example, well, because we want to limit pornography and children's access to it. That's why we need to regulate it. Anybody in the body politic who came forward and wanted to cut the people's access to information bluntly, I think would fail. What I fear is that it will ride in under the guise of some other reform that has the net result of the American people having less information.
Which meaning they could also use what happened in San Bernardino and different things to say if we had been regulating it then, that would have never happened. So they're piggybacking on other things that have already scared the crap out of us. Well,
one of the great dangers is an obvious one. That is, there are some who believe that what happened in San Bernardino means we need more wiretapping. We need more reading of people's emails. We need more cataloging of people's cell phone calls. And the government needs to become more intrusive than even the Patriot Act makes it. I'm not sure that that's the answer either, but whenever you have a cataclysmic event like this, those in the security apparatus will use it as an effort to increase spying.
Right.
And how do you balance that with our civil liberties?
Exactly.
It's a very tough question.
Yeah,
no question.
And it happened during, after 9/11 when, George W. Bush and his administration, every time there was a red alert right before his election, that's one reason I think he got reelected, because
I agree with you.
They kept doing, and as soon as the election was over, you never heard a red alert again. And
it's manipulation of people's fears based on what has happened. I agree with your analysis.
It's spoon-feeding the mass public the 30-second ads so redundantly that they start to believe it, whether it doesn't feel right or true to them at all, and then they vote accordingly.
Advertising works. It always has. It always will.
Well, it worked for Hitler.
You're right. All right.
But if you limit political money, then I can tell you what happens. Then only politicians or political dynasties have money. And therefore, I'm one of those who believes that money is speech, and I send my $25 or my $50 or my $100 to organizations and causes that I agree need to have a voice. If I couldn't do that, then it is only the professional politicians who have money, and the dynasties like the Clintons, who, Bill is now worth $100 million. Wow. Hillary is worth close to $80 million. Chelsea, even though she's 35 years old, she's worth about $30 million. Contrast that with, say, Richard Nixon, who left office and never, after leaving office, was on a corporate board, gave a paid speech, refused to lobby. He lived solely on the funds that were generated from the writing and publication of his own books.
Speaking
Jimmy Carter, who made no money in his first presidency, would not lobby, would not be on corporate boards, would not take honorariums for speech because he thought it was inappropriate for a former president.
That's why I like
Contrast that with Bill, who works as a lobbyist and then has this $2 billion global fraud called the Clinton Foundation, which is a slush fund for grifters, which is a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes by companies and individuals who had decisions that were worth millions of dollars to them in front of the State Department. The New York Times series on this was extraordinary.
Roger, you are such a colorful person as well. I want to take a real left turn here because I want to talk to you about the things that I find even more interesting about you. Okay, so tell me about this Nixon tattoo on your back. What is this about?
Sure, I'll be happy to. It's not, believe it or not, in any way a partisan or an ideological statement. I have many. I knew Nixon very well. I met him when I was 16. I was the youngest member of his staff at 19. I didn't really get to know him well until his post-presidential years.
I want to know about the tattoo.
I'm getting there.
And we're showing it, by the way.
For me, the tattoo is a daily reminder that in life, when you get knocked down, when things don't go your way, when you're defeated, when things look hopeless, when you're deeply disappointed, when life doesn't treat you right, you have an obligation to get up off the ground, dust yourself off, and get back into the fight. That's what the tattoo is about. Nixon's story is one of resilience. This guy got knocked down more times than you can imagine, and he just kept coming back. He staged the greatest comeback in American political history. He went through the disgrace of Watergate, yet he dies as a respected statesman trying to make peace with the Russians and the Chinese as an advisor to President Clinton.
I don't think so. I don't think he ever made his comeback. I disagree. I don't think so.
Well, 4 presidents spoke at his funeral.
Of course they would. He was a president.
He's very controversial. I don't deny that. But I'm telling you why I got the tattoo and what it means to me.
And if you got a Hillary tattoo, what would it mean? I'm just kidding.
If I got a Hillary tattoo, I'd have to get it on my derriere because every time I sat down, I'd be sitting on her face.
On that note, I think that's a good place to
Oh, my God.
Well, Roger, thank you so much for being a part of Truth Be Told. We really appreciate you.
Yeah.
This has been great. I appreciate it.
All right.
Bye,
well, thank you.
Roger.
And
Thank you
make
so
sure you
much.
go to rogerstone.com or stonezone.com. Check out all his books and what's coming up in his future. So, Roger, is there anything else that you want to tell our audience about that you're going to be doing?
I think that for my next book, because it's that time, my book on the Bushes has gone to the publisher. It's being printed now. It'll be out January 26th. It's called Jeb and the Bush Crime Family. I talk about Prescott Bush, his grandfather who made money, the family money, selling arms to the Nazis, George H.W. Bush, who oversaw the trafficking of multi-million dollars worth of cocaine into the United States to illegally finance the Nicaraguan rebels, and of course Jeb, who was a drug dealer in Miami, in Houston, in college, in boarding school.
What? Hold on there.
Now the
Read the
investigator.
book. Read the book.
Come on now. Really?
Read the book. Yes, absolutely. Read the book. The next thing I'm going to write about, I'm going to examine the death of John F. Kennedy Jr.
No.
Oh,
At the time of his death, he was moving towards running for the same U.S. Senate seat as Hillary Clinton wanted, and he'd begun moving around talking to key Democrats about it. And there are many anomalies about that airplane crash that don't add up, and that is the subject of my next book.
That'll be a bestseller.
It is just going to be a bestseller. So, all right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Roger.
And we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you later. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about
Some magnetizing money in a metaphysical way. Sorry, Anna.
What the hell?
That's right. All right. This is Tony Sweet on Truth Be Told. I'm with
Eddie Connor.
Anna Garcia.
We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.